Hey everybody, welcome to the Angst Podcast. My name is Jericho. I am your host. I'm bringing you guys a little bit of a long overdue upload here. It's been a while since I've recorded a podcast episode, and I kind of thought that this was just perfect timing. I think the date today is March 23rd, 2020, so we're kind of right in the middle, or potentially, who knows, maybe even the beginning of the COVID-19 or the coronavirus pandemic that's been sweeping the globe. And I just thought that I would sit down. I've been on quarantine myself for the last couple of days, so I've ended up with a little bit of extra free time. I thought this would be a great opportunity to sit down, press record, stimulate, and create a little bit of a conversation with you guys, because this is a global issue. I know kind of the information that I've received, the opinions that I have on the current situation, just being a mid-20s millennial living in Canada, but I think that this is affecting people differently. There has been a lot of misinformation throughout the last couple of days or weeks, and so I thought it'd be nice to kind of create conversations, see where everybody else is at, and kind of just reach out to the community, since I'm trapped here at home anyways, and the internet is definitely our best resource to connect. So I do have a notepad with me. I took a couple of notes or a couple of ideas that I thought would be cool to just express throughout this conversation. I know I have a bit of a tendency to ramble in some of these podcasts, so hopefully this will keep me a little bit on track. But I do want to preface our conversation just by saying that in no way, shape, or form am I an expert on any of these said topics. I would like to talk about the disease itself, the health impacts that's going to have on our society, both the physical disease and then the mental impacts, maybe potentially right now or even going forward. And I'd like to kind of polish and finish things up with some of the financial impacts and some of the global markets, and maybe just how those are going to change throughout the next couple of weeks, months, or years just going forward. But I'm not a doctor, I'm not a nurse, I have no formal healthcare training of any kind. I'm not an economist, I don't work in the financial institutions, so take everything I say with a grain of salt. I'm just a kid with a microphone, just kind of expressing my ideas and kind of the current headspace that I was in, at least here on March 23rd, 2020. So to kind of kick things off, just to talk about the disease, I'm sure everybody knows, it started in China. It's been moving since kind of the beginning of the year, maybe first reports in December into January. Information was a little hazy, at least from my perspective in the Americas at that time. We know China got hit pretty hard and pretty quick. It seemed to escalate primarily to Italy and has stayed there at seemingly the most high volume number of cases and deaths. They just weren't prepared, weren't ready. Europe as an epicenter is getting hit for those same reasons. And then the Americas have taken some strong stances to kind of restrict air travel, restrict freedoms to travel around society, closing businesses, creating social distancing programs, and I'm sure those restrictions are going to continue to kind of ramp up over the kind of next few weeks to come, assuming that they even weren't too late to create a massive problem on our side of the planet here as well. So it's going to be interesting to see how the next couple of days kind of plays out. As far as kind of how I wanted to kick things off here, I thought we would just hit a checklist of things that we know for a fact, and I've already listed a few. Started in China. Italy's been hit the hardest, and it's been interesting because as time's gone on, the information available to us has it's gone up and down. So China has seemingly over the last little while seemed to be able to contain some of their cases. Their numbers seem to have slowed down or at least peaked to some capacity. Italy has still been ramping up through this threshold higher and higher. And it's interesting when we face a global issue such as this, and every country kind of has their own protocol or their own structure and how they're going to handle and behave here. Clearly some countries are going to perform better than others. Currently in the situation right now, America seems to maybe have been a little bit late to the game. They may have kept some things open a little while longer than they should have, although some states like California have started to put heavy restrictions on your travel and your ability to interact with other individuals in society. Places like Florida seem to have not stopped or slowed down at all. Spring break is still going strong. I'm sure we've seen the videos of the punk kids that are out there choosing to party over actually protecting, the health of our entire society or the global economies going forward. It's more important for them to be on spring break getting shit-faced. So it's going to be interesting to see how the next couple of weeks play out, but every country has their own strategy, their own laws or capabilities to handling this issue. China, for example, I don't know for sure, but my hypothesis would be that the only reason that the numbers have kind of started to peak or slow down is that China has just implemented like draconian martial law restrictions to contain this. So they're not allowing people into the streets. They're barricading people into their apartments. They've closed all of their society and they've brought their economy to an absolute standstill. They're gassing the streets, and they have this ability to restrict and control and limit people's exposure. And that seems to be maybe one of their successful variables as this ramped up to trying to be able to contain or slow down the spread of this contagion. On another side of the spectrum, you have somebody like Italy, who we know that has been hit very hard. Seemingly, a couple of reasons as to maybe why they were one of the early ones. They didn't have a good amount of warning. They got hit fast. They maybe have a little bit of an older population, or individuals that maybe have a weaker immune system, or maybe they live in a tighter community, not as spaced out as maybe what we're used to living here in North America, or certainly in my country of Canada. Again, I don't know. I'm not a doctor. I'm sure there's a lot of variables, and the history books will look back and determine maybe what caused that to spread so quickly. Europe as a whole is so interconnected just with the EU, their train systems, people constantly moving around in a densely populated environment. It seems like that's a perfect opportunity for things to spread super, super quick. On a different side of the globe, though, there's a couple countries that actually have seemingly been doing okay so far. One of them seems to be Japan. And this is all just information I've read online. I don't know anybody from Japan personally. I've never been to Japan personally. But a couple things that I have heard is that they are already a relatively, this sounds almost rude, but they're already a relatively isolated culture, if you will. Their formal greeting practices don't involve actually, shaking hands or coming into contact. They're not big huggers. It's actually already quite normalized to wear a mask and to try to spread, or to try to limit the spread of airborne contagions anyways. I'm under the impression that they have a very, very high hospital bed to person, like per capita ratio, as well as their testing kits. They were very easily able to get out testing kits that worked efficiently and quickly, and so you're not waiting necessarily days at a time to see the results of if you're COVID positive, but you're potentially only waiting half a day or a few hours. So their ability to quarantine the individuals that had it early on was just quite high. And I'm sure that there's a lot of other factors. I don't know for sure. These are just details and information that I've heard, but Japan seems to be doing overall pretty well. Taiwan's another country that seemingly hasn't had their numbers escalate at a capacity that we maybe could have expected. One of the reasons for Taiwan's success might have just been travel limitations between Taiwan and China that were already set and had nothing to do with the coronavirus. So naturally, you just don't have a lot of people immigrating or coming over and spreading the contagion in the early on stages. Again, I don't know. This is just information that I've heard, but it's just interesting to see how different countries are handling this problem. When we move over to the Americas, like I had already referenced, it seems like there's certain states that are maybe getting hit hard and fast. New York State and California, obviously highly densely populated parts of America with international airports that see a ton of traffic. New York City, for example, has people crammed on top of each other, all not necessarily owning individual cars, but walking to work, taking public transport to work, and sharing small, tight-knit spaces quite readily. And they seem to be getting hit really, really fast. And one of the interesting variables in America, Trump being an obvious one, is that their willingness to act is kind of slow. And just in the grand scheme of outside of COVID-19, they're not really even... again, and I could be wrong, I know that this is a big conversation, but they're not even necessarily medically set up in the best way either. Yes, they have some of the most groundbreaking, impressive healthcare institutions in the world, but it's a private system, and so that's not readily available to all citizens. So you got to think of something like New York City. Their hospital bed per capita is insanely low, especially in comparison to more public healthcare nations, or like I already referenced, Japan. They are not prepared for this to any capacity. And it has nothing to do with COVID. It's just in their entire society, in their structure of the private healthcare system, it seems like they're really not planned, or that they have no contingency plan for an epidemic that's actually, or a pandemic that's actually going to affect their entire nation. Yes, if you have money and you get this early, I'm sure that America can perform well, but they didn't roll out testing kits. They don't have enough hospital beds, and I'm actually... going forward, I'm quite concerned for how this is going to explode in America. One of the other variables is that I think, and this is even a variable that I feel, or at least have noticed here in Canada, we have our health minister up on stage giving a speech basically saying, if citizens don't take the social distancing protocol seriously, that we're going to have to tighten restrictions. So even though businesses have closed, people aren't necessarily working, we've limited our social interactions. People, and especially my age or younger, the millennials or the Gen Zs, they're still going out, they're still playing poker with their buddies, they're still kicking cans on a Friday night, just twiddling their thumbs, trying to find something to do. They're not necessarily social distancing. And so if that type of behavior continues, if we can't contain these numbers, then the government's going to have to forcibly contain people to their homes and forcibly make sure that we're limiting as many public interactions as we possibly can. This is a tricky one because it kind of, from a mental health perspective, staying at home and quarantining yourself, not seeing your friends and your family, or not having a daily routine or schedule, that can be difficult. And especially when we're given an undetermined time variable here. Everybody, it's easy enough to say, oh, it'll be 2 weeks, but we don't really know that. And it's actually sounding like it's going to be ongoing, and it might even be months. So that's scary and that's intense, and that's a difficult thing to ask of people. Not to mention just the human freedoms and rights variable of we live in a first world nation with certain freedoms. If I want to walk outside to take my dog for a walk, that's a freedom I have. If I want to drive over to my parents' house to have a family dinner, that seems like something that shouldn't necessarily be restricted. But desperate times call for desperate measures, and if people aren't going to do this willingly, then at what point does it become a problem that's so large that the government just has to step in and lay down the law? And so I had already referenced, in China, this seems to be something that they are quite skilled at. Just given the way that their structure is set up, they are a little bit more of a communist style government. This has been a long time coming. They have the ability to lay down the law, seal people in, restrict their social gatherings. In America, there's kind of too much freedom for that, it's people stand behind their rights, and I totally respect it. But could you imagine Donald Trump invoking a federal nationwide martial law? Could you imagine? Think of the 2016 election. Think of being a Hillary Clinton supporter or a liberal that's had to watch Trump for the last couple of years run this country into the ground, depending on your opinions of the presidency himself or the president himself. Could you imagine that guy taking away the rights and freedoms of Americans? There would be militias in the streets. There's too many guns in America, and that's one of the problems. They have this freedom, this declaration that they just ran with, and they just decided that, freedom's basically number one. And in 99.9% of the situations that could possibly exist in the world, I would like to agree with them. I think that that's a super important variable for any nation to have. But in a situation like this, it makes it very difficult to kind of lock people in and slow down the contagion. And since they're such a densely populated nation that doesn't have access to a universal healthcare system, it's going to be scary and probably pretty intense to see how it plays out, especially as people continue to ignore the baseline information pieces that we know about social distancing. This does bring me to something that I would like to just acknowledge that I've had a little bit of confusion over the last little while, is when this story first started to break, it was pretty much just, you need to wash your hands, don't touch your face, try not to share things too much, and you should be okay. And it's turned into this level of, okay, but now it's 2 meters of social distancing, stay in your house unless you must leave, and when you do, make sure that you're not directly coming into physical contact with anybody. And this is kind of just in my head where information gets a little bit skewed, because is this an airborne contagion or not? If it gets bad enough, if enough of society got infected with this, could me just walking through the park be enough to just contract the disease, or would I have to come into some type of physical contact or surface? And maybe this is a solidified answer that people know that I just haven't seen, but I've heard kind of both sides of this story. If it is an airborne disease, me going to the grocery store, even though I'm going to try to limit that to whatever capacity, seems like a prime opportunity for me to just get infected. Loblaws, co-ops, Walmart, they're putting out applications that they need tens of thousands of workers to come in and help ramp up some of the numbers that they've been seeing in their stores and their supermarkets over the last couple of weeks. But that seems like a horrible idea. And this is coming from somebody that's actually lost my job. I'm already unemployed via this exact issue. I don't want to get back on the front lines. I don't want to take a temporary job at a supermarket where I feel like the contagion is just guaranteed. Every single person in society is walking through these doors at one point or another. And if it is in the air, that just seems like a recipe for disaster. So if you guys know, please correct me, but I feel like I'm still kind of in this gray area where I don't actually fully understand how the disease is spread. And furthermore, to build on that idea, I'm still a little bit confused, although I'm getting there. I'm still a little bit confused as to how intense the symptoms will be. And obviously I know that it depends on your immune system health, it depends on your age a little bit. But I've heard these crazy cases of some people seem to get it and kind of walk off with a minor cold or maybe a light flu. Some people get it and they're immediately hospitalized and or facing, ICU and death right away. And I guess I still have a hard time landing on which variable is correct. Is it just people with weaker immune systems, or is that blatant propaganda, and is everybody potentially at risk? Are there multiple strains of coronavirus, and so does it just depend on which strain you get or how it escalates within your own bodily system? I'm still a little confused by this. I'm not going to make a comment, but it just makes it hard to kind of navigate through society when it's this kind of mysterious beast that has so much misinformation about it. So guys, that's kind of category one of what I wanted to hit, of just like what we know about the disease, the countries that are being affected. I would say that just my own experience here in Canada, I do think that Canada's performed pretty well. We seem to move quick within the parameters of containing too much fear or freaking people out. We've shut down the borders, we've shut down a lot of businesses. Aid is being pumped out, which I'll get to in the financial section in the end. But for the most part, I feel like Canada is executing to their best of their ability, given the amount of information that we had. It's definitely tough to have to social distance and not see your friends or family, to not have a guaranteed income and not know what the next couple of months are going to look like. But I do just want to voice overly how gracious I am. It's a nice and beautiful reminder that we live in such a prosperous country and how lucky we are. I mean, if you're listening or watching this podcast right now, chances are you're living in a first world nation. And that is just a blessed experience, because when this whole globe, as difficult as times can be, we have still a global food chain supply that's reaching our markets. We still have clean water. We have access to the internet. I have my significant other and my loved ones in the home that I can still interact with. I can work on personal projects like this, and I feel still safe and secure. So even though there's all this anxiety about what the future is going to hold, I feel so happy to know that we live in a country that actually still life is good. And my sympathy goes out, my hearts go out to all these people that are living, in third world or impoverished nations that are already dealing with clean water, access to medicine, where they're going to get food to put on the table in the next couple of days or weeks. And now you lump in this issue of coronavirus spreading throughout the globe. And man, that is scary shit. Like all the anxiety that I feel being first world has to be 20-fold for some of these individuals. So I just want to take a moment to express my gratitude and how lucky I think we all are that have the opportunity to tune into the internet and podcasts like this, and to sympathize and just express love and best wishes for anybody that's not so lucky. Moving forward, the second category that I kind of want to come into is, again, just kind of this misinformation factor of we're taking these massive risks, mostly on our economy, but also on our mental health as a society. People going into quarantine for an unrestricted amount of time to fight or combat a disease that we don't really, again, from my perspective, I don't have all the information on. I totally understand that there is an enemy that we're at war with. It is decimated China. It is decimating Europe. It's only going to continue to get worse. I think America is going to get hit unbelievably hard. But it's just so tricky because it feels so invisible, right? Like I personally do not know a single human being that has tested positive. In my province, I think that we have had maybe one death, and in Canada, there's been a handful. So what's very interesting is just how these people, I look outside right now, the birds are singing. It's a sunny bluebird day. The snow is melting away. Summer's coming. People are walking their dogs. Like it looks like just a normal, regular existence. Like I haven't actually had any interaction with this disease. So it seems like this silent enemy. And I think that's one of the problems, especially in my generation and with younger people, is it's really easy to just say, I don't get what the problem is. This is just getting blown out of proportion. I think they're making it bigger than it needs to be. And don't get me wrong, I love a good conspiracy theory. I'm the first one to usually put up my hand and ask a couple of questions, just like, where did this disease come from? What information are they sharing with us? Usually in the health sector, governments don't function at 100% transparency. That can often cause panic and misinformation to be spread. So I'm the first one to kind of raise a hand or kind of to question some of the variables that we might necessarily not be getting told. But I think it's definitely hard. And again, I just sympathize with people that aren't necessarily seeing this disease on the front lines and aren't necessarily following news cycles or aren't necessarily up to date with the information that the globe has, because it makes it kind of hard for people to act and actually take it seriously when we're fighting this kind of foreign agent or this invisible disease that we're not actually getting to interact with. I mean, if you had asked, you're going to ask somebody to restrict all contact with their loved ones and to essentially only go out for absolute necessity reasons and basically just stay put for an undetermined amount of time, like minimum 2 weeks, but let's be honest, it could be 6 or 8. Like we really don't know. And the longer it takes us to get our act together, the longer that time frame is going to be. If I asked every single person in America for the next 2 weeks to they were not allowed to smoke a cigarette, to have a cup of coffee, or to drink an alcoholic beverage. 2 weeks, every single person in America. I'm fairly convinced a measurably large percentage of the population would fail. And that's only 2 weeks. Let's scale this out to 2 months. You're not allowed to have coffee for 2 months. Think of every single person that you know. Is that going to be tangible for them? And I know that this sounds ridiculous, but they have to, but you need to think of this scale. I'm talking about cigarettes and caffeine. Let's go up to like social interactions. Like we are social creatures. We need to see one another. And it's one thing if you live at home with your family, when you have a significant other, when you're still getting that love and that interaction your day-to-day basis, just wherever you're quarantined to. But some people are not so lucky. If you live by yourself, if you don't have a lot of friends within your community, normally going to the gym, going to work, having these social interactions and these routines, they keep you mentally sane and stable. And if you were already somebody that was in a depressed state and high anxiety state, if you already struggle with social interactions or not being around people for a certain amount of time, you got to think of what these parameters are going to do to people for the long term. It's going to create a massive increase of mental health concerns. And so I don't even know what my point is, because I don't know what the solution to this problem is. I guess all I'm saying is that I sympathize with the individuals that are not going to perform very well here or are not correctly social distancing, because although on paper it seems like this easy mandatory just enforcement thing, we got to understand that we're about to enter into a Great Depression, in my opinion. I think that this is going to be 1930s plus some, and I think that for a lot of individuals, this, considering the current state of mental health in our society already, I think that we're in for a little bit of a rough ride. Which kind of brings me into my final category, the third category here, which is kind of the financial impact that I think this disease is going to have in the long term. We have already seen $2 trillion stimulus packages getting pumped out by the Fed. Here in Canada, the Liberal government has stepped up and said that 82 billion, is going to get pumped out to help support small businesses and individuals. I myself have already had to apply for EI basically on a whim out of nowhere, as are hundreds of thousands of individuals across North America, but also the globe. Not to mention the amount of people that are going to die and the limit of working force that we're going to see going forward. But the thing about the economy, and I'm going to shift gears here a little bit, is that I don't actually think what we're seeing in the stock markets, what we're seeing with this money being printed, is actually COVID-19's fault. I don't actually think that this is necessarily the virus that's causing this. I think that this has been a long time coming. I think that we left the gold standard here in North America back in the Nixon era, back in the early 70s, and we've been printing money whenever the fuck we want for a long time. You look at the national debt of America, you're sitting at $22 trillion, and that's going up every single year. And people are always kind of looking at each other like, well, who are we in debt to? What's going on here? We have been taking loans out from countries all over the place. We take loans out from the feds consistently. They print money that has no backing of any kind. The only backing that it has is just the belief structure in America. It's just the belief that the economy and the engine can keep going, but it's not backed by gold or any tangible commodity of any kind. And rightfully so. We can make economic arguments that it's not realistic for us to function in that economy anymore. But what also isn't realistic is to constantly just print money whenever there's a crisis. In 2008, we had an economic housing collapse created by corruption and greed and capitalism in the banking institutions in America. That's this too big to fail dynamic that essentially has the government come in, bail out the banks, bail out the automotive industry for the tune of 600 or 700 billion dollars that they made up. It's not from anybody. It wasn't taxed. It wasn't sitting in a surplus and reserve that the government was handling money really well. They printed it. That is directly inflating the dollar and the currency. And so what you would have expected to see is the dollar fall. You would have expected to see this massive amount of currency inflation just by pumping all this money that should never existed into the system. But you didn't. Instead, what you saw is a minor little recession for a few years, and then you saw markets ramp up to an all-time high. The Dow Jones was coming into 30K. We were hitting all-time high levels before this COVID virus hit. You want to talk about inflation. The inflation went into the private sector, into the markets, as well as into the housing market. It didn't go directly into the dollar. It didn't feel like you were losing money, but we artificially inflated the economy based off of helicopter money. And we're going to do it again. This has been a long time. This has been a bubble that has been built up based off of how banks and institutions have been loaning and giving away money to whoever will ask. Interest rates are supposed to be functioning at those 4, 5, 6% from an international lender standpoint. So if you're a bank or if you're a government that goes and you need money from the Federal Reserve, you're taking out a certain amount of interest. They've had to drop these rates back to essentially zero. They never had time to recover from when they were zero before in the old economic collapse. So, I see one of two things happening here. I see either we create an insane amount of artificial helicopter money and we pump it into the economy, which is happening, and people are demanding it. Even myself, I'm somebody that's having to approach and go on to EI or accept money. I live close to paycheck already, and you have a crisis that's going to take me out of the economy for months at a time. I'm somebody that's going to need a handout as well. So it's easy to get this liberal socialist mentality that nobody should fail. All small businesses should remain. Everybody should be okay because this was nobody's fault. It was a virus that we didn't see coming. But how can we possibly say that when we're just going to artificially pump it back up? That's literally what a balloon is. So either we're going to balloon it and it's going to be bigger than ever before, and it's going to be a ticking time bomb that we're going to see in the next 5 to 15 years crash again, and it's going to be even worse than if we let it crash now, or it's going to not work. And this is actually a crazy time in human history where we're going to see the financial institutions and this fake little game of debt that we've been playing with a fake dollar for the last 50 years, it's going to be destroyed. And we're looking at a complete restructuring of financial institutions and the economy as a whole, and that is going to take decades. So I don't mean to finish with this scary, insane, intense point, but I think that this virus is actually doing a great job of waking people up as to how our society actually functions. Let me hit you with a couple other variables that are going to need to change in the long term. First of all, why do we allow China to have markets that allow random animals to just be slaughtered and sit one on top of one another so people can eat fucking bats or who knows what else they can find sitting right beside each other? That needs to stop immediately. Also, global supply chains all coming from a cheap labor market like China, including medicine and IV bags, is a major problem. So when the supply chains get cut, when China has a pandemic break out of it, which the last 3 have come from China, I would add, then global supply chains get hit. We can't get medicine over to the Americas. We've outsourced our economy. We don't have the ability, think about food. We don't have the ability to even grow a lot of the foods that you see in the supermarket. That's in Central America and Mexico. And so when the global economy starts to come to a halt, we realize how reliant we are on these other nations. And is that even, that globalization is a great thing when times are good, and then it becomes a little bit tricky, a little bit scary when times get bad like this. So I think that we've got a bit of a wake-up call coming in how we're going to structure our markets and our global and our local economies going forward. And then, I think that this is a really important wake-up call about how the financial institutions work, how money is made, what governments are going to look like going forward as far as universal basic incomes, if that's a good or a bad idea, of what standards of commodities we're going to base money going off of forward, that's going to come into play. Gold, Bitcoin, is gold about to make a massive rally? Should we be coming back to a gold standard here? Is the entire economy going to collapse as Bitcoin is coming into an halving halfway through 2020 here? Is Bitcoin have the potential to pop as a global currency? Again, I'm totally off topic, but Bitcoin, in my opinion, nice and easy. It's a belief in the blockchain and the mathematics and the algorithms behind the blockchain. do you hold that belief higher than your belief in the American government's capability to succeed? I mean, do you believe in Donald Trump, this stimulus package, these healthcare programs, the polarization we've been seeing over the last couple of years, or do you want to place your bet on a more global commodity? And if it's not Bitcoin, maybe it's gold, maybe it's silver, maybe it's an entirely new blockchain. But all I'm saying is that in the next couple of years, these are important questions that we're going to have to be asking going forward. At the end of the day, guys, I think I always want to leave these on a positive note. I think that this is an opportunity, like I said, especially for those of us in the first world, to really kind of bunker down. We got to determine what are the important and necessary variables within our life that we have to protect and we have to appreciate and be gracious for all the time. Friends, family, your health, your freedoms, things that are potentially going to be taken away from you over the next couple of weeks or months. And I think it's just a good and nice reminder to kind of come back to those more solidified and basic human needs and values. And then I hope that this is a good wake-up call on going forward how our civilization is going to look, where we're going to find success in the future, and in times of crisis, hopefully prove to one another that we can rally together and defeat or go to war, if you will, with this virus. Because honestly, I don't think this is going to be the last one. I think that COVID-19 and the coronavirus, if anything, we're almost lucky. Yes, there's a couple of variables about it can sit in your system for days or a couple weeks at a time and go undetected, so that obviously makes it easy to spread. But for the most part, the fatality rate isn't as high as it could be. And for some people that get the disease, the symptoms are not as severe as they could be. And I think that, a combination of weaker immune systems, spraying glyphosate and creating autoimmune disorders all throughout our globe and throughout our citizens and our society, I think mixed in with superbugs and antibiotics and overuse of medicine to kill off all the weak strains of potential viruses, and then have these super viruses are going to pump up in the future. If I'm going to be alive, I'm 26 right now, let's say I live to be 86, I got 60 more years. Do we really think that in that time frame this is going to be the only pandemic, the only virus or disease that sweeps through? I doubt it. And what if the next one is twice as deadly, spreads twice as quick? I think that going forward, this is a nice opportunity, a wake-up call to look at how our institutions are structured and how we're going to handle times of chaos or pandemics or things, rainy days that we don't necessarily see coming. And it's not about infinite spending and infinite debt, but how are we actually going to create surpluses of human love and human capital so that when times do get fucking intense and crazy, we're not playing catch up, but we actually have a ready and available contingency plan to progress forward. Because life's tricky, man. Like, it's not, the universe is very good at throwing curveballs at us. And I think that as human beings, we try so hard to force and control and create the reality that we want, when we have to sit back and respect that we're just a part of it. And you know what? If a virus sweeps through and is going to impact massive metropolises of people that we have tried to create apart or aside or outside of nature, we need to respect that nature's not always going to play ball. And sometimes things are going to happen, tsunamis are going to happen, diseases are going to happen, economic collapses are going to happen. And it's just about keeping your head up high, keeping together, spreading the love, and problem solving. So hopefully you guys enjoyed the podcast. I really appreciate you guys listening to my rambles. It really means a lot. Hopefully I can do a couple more of these as information and the stories change over the next couple of weeks. And otherwise, leave a comment and join the conversation. Chat soon, guys.